Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Christo van der Rede. I'm the Executive Director at the Foundation, and it's really an honor to have you all present here today. The Foundation has opened its doors last year, and as you can see, we have an exhibition here giving an overview of South Africa's constitutional transformation. And then we have on the inside a display of our constitution, constitutional values, as well as the Bill of Rights. And our work at the Foundation is centered around promoting, advancing the Constitution and helping, making a contribution to ensure that the Constitution becomes a reality for all South Africans. I just want to also just welcome the staff, Daniela, also our interns. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. And then I also see a lot of young people here today. And that makes me, as an old man, very excited. Not for any other reason, but because the future is you, right? And I'm very, very privileged that you're here today. Also, a very, very special guest here this morning, the leadership from CAS, Christian, also our ambassador I've seen here. There she is, welcome. And then also Dave. Dave is the previous executive director, also a board member. And Dave has really laid a solid foundation for what we have achieved today. I'm not going to name everyone, but I also see the moderator from the Dutch Reformed Church, Jan, also the CEO of the Afrikaanse Taalraad, as well as the burger, se groot man hier so vandag. So welcome, and a lot of Dr. Fani, Prof. Fani's son, also a colleague that works very closely with us from time to time, his spouse, and also Cecil there on the other side. So yes, thanks very much for coming this morning. I am going to give the opportunity to Daniela to also share a few words of welcome. Over to you.
Welcome, esteemed guests, dignitaries, board members, and members of the media, as well as those of you joining us online. All protocols observed. I'm an admitted attorney, currently on the non-practicing role, and I serve as the F.W. de Klerk Foundation's Constitutional Rights Program Manager. Welcome to the F.W. de Klerk Foundation's launch of its annual Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Rights Report Card, commonly known as the CRL Rights Report Card. We would like to express our gratitude to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, or CAS. How's my pronunciation, Chris? Yes. Okay. We would like to express our gratitude to CAS for making today's event possible. CAS is a German political foundation closely associated with the Christian Democratic Union. Its work is based on the principles of fairness, justice, and solidarity, aiming to promote democracy, the rule of law, and a social market economy worldwide. CAS operates in 120 countries across the globe, of which South Africa is one, and they have been in South Africa and active since the early years of democracy. Now, the F.W. de Klerk Foundation engages in several key activities, including actively promoting the rights and freedoms in our Constitution. It also works to promote national unity, non-racialism, and reconciliation, as well as the accommodation of diverse languages and cultures in South Africa. Now, the Foundation is in the process of compiling the F.W. de Klerk archive and endeavors to preserve the legacy of former President de Klerk. Now, one of the most important parts of his legacy is the Constitution. And for this reason, the Foundation launched the Center for Constitutional Transformation, or CCTSA, in which we are sitting, and for which each of you would have received a booklet on your seat. Now, the Centre documents the process of how South Africa became a constitutional democracy. And we encourage you to undertake a self-tour of it after today's launch during the serving of drinks and refreshments. By the way, if you decide to do a self-tour, you will see that the panels each have QR codes that you can scan, which will take you down into a deeper dive of each of the topics that's covered in that bullet point, should you be interested. Now, turning to the Serial Rights Report Card, this is a project that the Constitutional Rights Program of the Foundation undertakes annually to celebrate Heritage Month, and it is a tribute to the diverse cultures, beliefs, and languages that make up South Africa. Now, the report card endeavors to assess the degree to which the Constitution's various cultural, religious, and linguistic rights, or CRL rights, are enjoyed in practice. It hopes to gauge how far we as a nation have come, but also how far we still have to go to get to a place where we promote, protect, and celebrate our diversity. Because as the Constitution's preamble reminds us, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. Just quickly, some key trends from Stats SA's 2022 census before we kick off. isiZulu and isiXhosa remain the most widely spoken home languages at 24.4% and 16.3% respectively, while Khoi, Nama, and San languages are spoken by just over 6,000. Now, this illustrates the vulnerability of smaller indigenous languages and the importance of their promotion to avoid extinction. Christianity remains the dominant religion at 84.5%, though secularism is rising, highlighting the need for inclusive protection of both religious and non-religious beliefs and communities. Multiracial households now constitute 11.4% of all households in the country, reflecting increased social integration and changing dynamics of cultural identity. I now hand over to my learned colleague, Christian Enders from CAS, for his opening remarks.
Right. Good morning, everyone. How lovely to see you on a cold day in Cape Town after we've had some nice weather. I really appreciate seeing so many faces and so many familiar faces. Good morning, Dave, and good morning, Christo. I'd also like to specifically say good morning, Tanja Verheit, the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, dear colleagues and friends. And then finally, of course, the team from the de Klerk Foundation that we really do consider close friends and that we enjoy seeing so much. I stand here on behalf of the resident representative of CAS South Africa, Mr. Gregor Yeke, who also sends his best wishes to those assembled and, of course, to those online. Now, to speak in this building is always a great honor, considering the legacy of former President F.W. de Klerk. His life reminds us of leadership, of integrity and courage, and how it can transform the dynamic of a nation, the trajectory of history. He took the most difficult decisions when history demanded it, and we recognize this deeply because in Germany, we learned how fundamental democracy is to protect human dignity, but also we learned how fragile democracy is and how quickly it can be taken away. When democracy failed in Germany in the 1930s, dictatorship and terror followed. Excuse me. And after 1945, Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of West Germany, and others rebuilt a democratic Germany on the promise of never again. Never again must human dignity be trampled in the name of ideology or power. And that promise continues to be our mission as the Konrad Adenauer Foundation to this day. As Daniela mentioned, we operate in over 100 countries, and our goal is clear: to strengthen democracy, to promote the rule of law, and to place human dignity at the center of public life. Now, today's report cards speaks exactly to these ideals. CRL, cultural, religious, and linguistic rights, really test how serious we are about democracy. Because democracy, on the one hand, is about majority rule, but also about protecting minorities. It is about ensuring that every person can live with dignity without having to give up who they are. But it presents us with a big challenge, and it's a challenge that we're seeing internationally, be it in the United States or Europe, Brazil, just to name a few, because the challenge is one of balance. On the one hand, we need tolerance. We need to respect difference, but we also need social cohesion. We need to have common ideas. We need to have a sense of belonging, togetherness. Both matter. They both have to come together, because to deny difference is to deny identity, but to deny identity would deny society. It's a combination of the two that we need to look for. Yuval Harari, an academic based in Tel Aviv, I'm going to paraphrase very loosely, but he says that pride in one's own identity is a great force for good. But if we place that identity or that pride above those of others, or define that as being different, then it becomes problematic. It is a fine line, but it's important to recognize when we use language which is about pride in ourselves versus pride of being better than others. Every Democrat needs to have a sensitivity to hearing the language of othering, of demeaning, when people speak about pride. I'm going to go a little bit further in this topic, or a little bit tangential, which is to move to free speech. I strongly recommend having a look at the YouTube video or the presentation that Bernie Sanders did after the shooting of Charles Kirk, in which he called for the freedom of speech. It is superb. I cannot recommend enough that you go have a look at it. But it does ask the question on free speech of whether offense amounts to harm when it touches a collective identity. Now, we would all agree as Democrats that the state has a responsibility to protect citizens from harm. Whether it is violence, whether it's discrimination, whether it's exclusion. I think that's a fairly straightforward thing. We can recognize it. But what about offense? Offense can wound deeply, especially when it's directed not at a person, but at a group, at a collective. And the sensitivity to the difference is really something that we are practicing internationally. We're trying to explore that difference in language between demeaning and recognition. We need to maintain open discussion, so offense can't be an all-encompassing cancellation of free speech, but also we have to recognize the very real impact of collective trauma. Not easy questions. They require careful thought. I'm not going to give you an answer today. I'm working on it. But holding in tension these values is really what we are after here, and that is something that we recognize in the F.W. de Klerk Foundation. It's the necessity for dialogue, the necessity for building bridges, the necessity to keep human dignity at the center of our conversation, be it political, economic, or social. So that's why today's report card is so valuable, because it allows us to have a look at the facts and analysis. It grounds our debate, moving away from anecdote towards a picture that we can actually grapple with. Rights are not abstract principles. They affect the everyday life that we experience and how we see other people. So again, may I, on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, recognize, celebrate, and congratulate the F.W. de Klerk Foundation on this important initiative. We look forward to the discussions it may spark in the media and today, and to our continued partnership in defending democracy, in protecting human dignity, and to build a South Africa where diversity is celebrated while unity is strengthened. So I thank you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much, Christian. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've released a report earlier this year that focused on rights such as the right to housing, the right to education, the right to health, etc. And that report card looked not as good as this one, because what we've realized was that a lot of those rights that are embedded in the Bill of Rights, it has a very, very important or very significant economic underpinning. And because of the state of our economy, you cannot actually realize the right to education, quality education, the right to health facilities and health care, the right to proper housing, etc. And then there's a whole lot of other factors that undermine the realization of those rights. Today we release a very important, very significant report that deals with cultural rights, language rights, etc. And this report looks much better. But I don't think that we should in any way rest on our laurels, because we live in a world, we live in a country that becomes more and more polarized. People are less tolerant to opposing views. We've seen how entities, political organizations, premise their views on specific ideologies and on specific views that are not consistent with the values embedded in our national constitution. And that should be the red light that starts to flicker for all of us. And that's why the work that we do here at the Foundation is really premised on the Constitution, the values, the aspirations embedded in it, and also the rights. But with those rights come responsibilities. And how do we balance all of those things so that at the end of the day, we become the nation that we have all started to dream about in 1994. That dream remains deferred, but that responsibility to make that dream a reality, it rests on all of our shoulders. Can never be left just to government or to politicians. The role of ordinary citizens, ordinary people, become even more vital at this stage. And I spoke to somebody this morning, he's a PhD student, and we had a very lengthy discussion about left ideologies versus right ideologies and so forth. And I said to him, you know what? We still live in the best country in the whole wide world. And we've seen it. More and more people come back home. And a lot of people from other countries start to come and live in South Africa, which tells me that within the next 10 to 20 years, I think South Africa will really become a place of choice. But that dream of becoming the country that, as we started off in 1994, the role model for democratic transitioning, establishing a democratic dispensation, that we continue to build on that legacy and become the country of choice and a country that is deeply appreciated and deeply respected by the rest of the world. We are able to achieve that. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's program will obviously focus on presenting two in-depth analysis of the team's findings. First, with regard to language rights, and then with regard to religious and cultural rights. We will also have a question and answer session, and I would like you to really participate. Our program will conclude hopefully at 12:30, and we have lots of drinks, lots of nice things to enjoy. Please stay with us. Then, esteemed guests, dignitaries, board members, members of the media, and those joining us online. South Africa's primary strength is not our vast mineral wealth, but our vast wealth in terms of the diversity of our people. Our differences are not a weakness, but rather what enables South Africans' vast resourcefulness and talent that has allowed us to persevere and overcome challenges that the rest of the world thought was not possible. The cultural, religious, and linguistic rights, both of individuals and communities, covered by Daniela and the team in this report card, are an integral part of that vast resourcefulness and talent. You can just, I hope you've all watched how we slaughtered the All Blacks last Saturday. And that's a real display of our resourcefulness. So, ladies and gentlemen, as per the Constitutional Court, protecting and advancing diversity is one of the key characteristics of a free and open society. And it's vital to note that the Constitution celebrates diversity as one of South Africa's core assets. It does not merely tolerate it. Unity in diversity is central to our national identity. I traveled the world and I went to Europe, to America, etc. And we are very, very far down the road in terms of tolerance, in terms of people from diverse backgrounds having the ability to not just tolerate each other, but respect each other. You can go down the streets, you can go into the public, go onto the sports field, you will see how people from various backgrounds embrace each other. And that is significant for a country that comes from a past where we were divided in terms of race and a whole lot of other stuff. So we are really a role model for many other countries where those societies struggle to really come to terms with diversity, with ethnicity. And we see that, how people have become intolerant to migrants, how they have become intolerant of each other's political views, where people will go so far to kill you. But be it as it may, we're still very privileged. And how do we really come together as a nation and talk through the issues that still, we regard as a liability? We've had the privilege of Prof. Julian Son and Cecil facilitating these discussions. We've had these discussions a few Saturdays back, and we will continue with that. Just ordinary people coming together and have this kind of open discussions. And yes, confront the demons that we still struggle with. So ladies and gentlemen, cultural, religious, and linguistic rights, obviously it guarantees to communities the openness and the freedoms that we enjoy in and through the Constitution. Two key guardians are created to safeguard these rights. That's the Pan-South African Language Board. Their job is to promote the use of official languages, and the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities, to promote respect for the rights of these different communities. The effectiveness of these institutions is the decisive factor in whether these CRL rights translate into a lived reality. So in this report, ladies and gentlemen, as I've said, we focus on first language rights, and there are a few focus areas: Section 6.1 of the Constitution, Section 6.2, Section 6.3. You can have a look at that, but it's all about dissecting in terms of how these different sections in the Constitution are really practiced in reality, so that all of us can enjoy these diverse languages and also use those languages to our economic advantage. Where I come from, people there speak Afrikaans. English is a language that you hardly hear there, but they've learned to use that language to grow the local economy, to bind people together within that space. I worked for some time in the Fort Hare University and visiting communities to do research. There people speak isiXhosa. And how do you use that language to educate people, to advance them economically, to build their self-pride, and to create self-reliant communities? We often take the shortcut and think English is the language to do so. People there can hardly speak English. Why do we want to force a language that at the end of the day will just benefit the elite? Only people out there speak the languages that they have grown up, that they used to. I paid a visit some time ago to, I don't want to say it out loud, to Nkandla.
Did you see the fire pool?
And there I worked, as I drove and trying to find that place, because there was some big event just outside of Nkandla. The interesting thing is none of the people there could speak English. They only spoke Zulu. Right? And that's how they've created a space, an environment. And the big question is, how do we leverage their language to build local economies, to build people's self-esteem, to give people an opportunity? Constitution talks about equal opportunities. And how do we create opportunities through the languages, the indigenous languages that people speak? I think we are still very privileged that we have the oldest language spoken by the San people in the Northern Cape. And I really commend the community there for, promoting their language, growing the language. But too little is being done to safeguard and protect that language from complete extinction. If we lose that language, ladies and gentlemen, we lose the heart and soul of South Africa. Because the Khoi, the San people, they are the real heartbeat of our country. And I think much more can be done to really help those communities to take those languages to the next level. We will also focus on the religious freedom, freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion. And lastly, when considering culture, the team has examined freedom of association, the right to use the language, participate in the culture of choice. And we also focus on the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've also used a grading system. As you can see there, A stands for excellent, B for good, C for moderate, D for poor, and E for very bad. Yeah, sounds like my report card when I was at school. And when we have various signs, equal sign indicates no change in the right, a plus sign, an improvement, and a minus sign indicates regression in the enjoyment of the right. So we are the first to admit that allocating these kind of symbols, yes, there's an element of subjectivity in there, but obviously it is just to help us understand where we are heading in terms of growing and realizing those rights. So the report card, ladies and gentlemen, is but a tool to open discussions about the enjoyment of rights and freedoms. The rationale for the grade, each right of freedom received, is explained obviously at the bottom of that report card. Thank you for your attentive consideration. I'm now going to ask Lusanda Makuntsu, who will discuss the findings regarding language rights. And ladies and gentlemen, we are very proud. Every year we appoint a number of interns to come and work for us. And lo and behold, many of these interns now have full-time jobs because we provide them with a platform, we provide them with the necessary opportunity to grow and to go and apply those skills in other places of work. And we will continue to do so because I think it's critical that we give young people the opportunity to prove their worth, but also within a space where they can do so freely and safely. So please come to the fore. Oh, yes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I will be presenting on language rights in South Africa based on the Religious, Cultural and Linguistic Rights report card by the F.W. de Klerk Foundation. Language is more than just communication. It reflects dignity, culture and identity. Constitution recognizes 11 languages, and South African Sign Language will soon be the 12th. Section 29(2) of the Constitution guarantees us the right to education in a language of choice. Yet, despite these strong commitments, the Foundation's 2025 report card shows us that these languages remain the language rights remain the weakest of our cultural, religious, and linguistic rights. This tells us that while the progress exists, there are still serious gaps between the rights on the paper and rights on reality. As of 2025, only about 8% of national departments, public entities report being ready to implement the South African Sign Language as our official language, with funding being the biggest barrier. The Pan-South African Language Board requests various national organs of state to advise it what executive and administrative measures that they can adopt to implement the South African Sign Language becoming an official language. It subsequently released a report on the national organs of state readiness for implementation of the Constitution 18th Amendment Act of 2023 on the 21st of January 2025. It is called the State of Readiness Report. In the State of Readiness Report, the Pan-South African Language Board found that the funding was the biggest stumbling block to implementation, but the departments are trying to prepare for when the act comes into effect. Some departments are already outsourcing interpretation services, while others are planning to. Pan-South African Language Board was also told that departments are struggling to fulfill vacancies available to fill the South African Sign Language interpreting posts because suitable candidates preferred to freelance rather than taking up full posts. Only the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture responded that they have a full-time sign language interpreter and they were planning to recruit a second one to meet the demand. Some also pointed out challenges that the South African sign language interpreters in rural areas. However, in some departments like the Department of Tourism, they are scheduling South African Sign Language training for their staff to ensure effective communication and service delivery. Therefore, Pan-South African Language Board recommended that the Act come into operation to allow budgets and to be allocated by organs of state to improve implementation and then compliance. In education, there has been some progress. The mother tongue-based bilingual education model, which was pioneered in the Eastern Cape, is now expanded nationally. This means that by 2030, learners are expected to write their general education certificate in their home languages. And by 2033, National Senior Certificates exam will also be written in their official languages. The Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Gwakube, has previously stated that she has plans to expand mother tongue education across the country, ensuring that the parity of esteem for African languages, because the school books written in indigenous languages go a long way in restoring the esteem of indigenous languages and promoting multilingualism in line with the Constitution and Language in Education Policy 1997. The launch of the IRIS, an AI-powered robot which could teach in official languages, is another important step. IRIS represents unprecedented opportunities to give effect to every learner's right to receive an education in language of their choice and to solving their poor literacy skills. The basic education, the state of the language and learning and teaching in schools, a quantitative overview 2008 to 2016, released in May, shows that in 2016, a total number of 45,810 schools existed. However, over half of the schools they were taught in English, despite it being the mother tongue of only 8.7% of South Africans, according to the 2022 census report. A study also found that adopting English as a language of learning and teaching in Soweto primary school created more problems than benefits. Learner participation did not improve, teachers lacked resources and multilingual teaching skills, and the linguistic capital of learners were overlooked. The study concluded that these practices are exclusionary and that inclusive policies aligned with socio-linguistic contexts are urgently required. However, risks remain. The Bella Act allows provincial heads to override school governing bodies on school language policies. This may weaken the protection of schools that have indigenous language as their language of learning and teaching. Despite progressive policy shifts and technological innovations in IRIS, English remains disproportionately dominant as as a language of learning and teaching, creating barriers to true multilingualism. To unlock the cognitive and academic benefits of mother tongue instructions, firstly, South Africa must implement the multi-tongue-based bilingual model. This requires scaling up teacher training in multilingual pedagogy. Investment in IRIS across all public schools is strongly encouraged to bring about practical integration and multilingualism in schools now possible. It is recommended that to overcome parental preferential for English, this is driven by its perceived economic advantages. The Department of Basic Education launched a campaign to promote the benefits of mother tongue language education amongst parents, emphasizing that this will not sacrifice fluency in English. Additionally, the department should set measurable targets for language parity and incentivize school governing bodies to mitigate indigenous languages meaningfully into teaching, research, and assessment. Universities are also taking language more seriously. For example, Walter Sisulu University is promoting isiXhosa and Sesotho in research. The University of Cape Town has also adopted new policies that include AfriCups, Quick Go Up, in Tsuk, sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, and sign language alongside their main teaching languages, which is isiXhosa, English, and Afrikaans. And UNISA has also created multilingual study guides, giving thousands of distance learners support in their own languages. However, although universities have adopted multilingual policies, the practical use of African languages in teaching and research remains very limited. The gap between formal policy and classroom reality continues to undermine the parity of esteem. At the government level, municipalities are constitutionally mandated to reflect the language of needs of local communities and their communication and preferences of their residents. However, we've seen some positive developments. The City of Cape Town has introduced multilingual chatbots and digital platforms, allowing citizens to access services in English, Afrikaans, and isiXhosa. This shows how technology can be used to make public services more inclusive. But overall, municipalities' compliance with Section 6 is very poor. Many rely on outdated language policies. However, it is important to point out that even the most up-to-date language policies do not guarantee implementation. According to the Pan-South African Language Board's 5-year strategic plan, 2025 to 2030, only half of local government complied with the language-related prescripts. Similarly, in June 2025 study revealed that Ekurhuleni Metropolitan Municipality, despite recognizing 6 official languages, continues to issue most communications, which are circulars, tenders, and notices, exclusively in English. These practices ignore the importance of language needs. It is important that the local government always use the latest statistics available from Stats SA and supplement this by, for example, the following. Firstly, identify their residents' needs by integrating language preferences into existing municipal services interaction, such as permits, application, rate payments, or complaints. And secondly, use short online surveys distributed through municipal websites, social media, or messaging platforms such as WhatsApp to identify their residents' current language needs. Furthermore, it is recommended that all spheres of government, the local, provincial, and national, leverage the new AI technology that allows the services delivery interactions to occur in the user's language preferences. For example, using the generative artificial intelligence to produce multilingual public service videos for diverse populations, using live AI translations for public meetings that promotes real-time captions and translations, using AI-based documents translation platforms that offer secure large files, translation of government documents, even including PDFs or scanned files, to ensure that critical information such as tenders, bylaws, policies, and public notices are available in all official languages. Exploring real-time speech-to-text and speech translation that would enable multilingual communication and live interactions, such as service counters or call centers, public hearings, and emergency hotlines. And using AI-powered multilingual chatbots, as the City of Cape Town is doing, to provide real-time conversational support in multiple languages via website, the mobile apps, or messaging platforms for routine queries. The above represent a cost-effective methods that contain the potential to completely revolutionize the government in all spheres and citizens interact and should be explored. The ultimate goal is to minimize linguistic barriers to ensure equitable access to the government services for all South Africans. In conclusion, language rights in South Africa remain fragile, but there also is a promising signs in progress. To move forward, the Pan-South African Language Board must be strengthened. Funding must be secured, compliance with Section 6 and Section 29(2) must be enforced, and innovation and technology must be harnessed. Protecting and promoting language is not just about culture, it is about equality, inclusion, and democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Lusanda, for very aptly taking us through the different linguistic rights assessed in the report card. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to point out that on the printout you found on your seat, there's a QR code at the back. So if you use your smartphone and scan the QR code, it will take you to a link to download the entire report card on your cell phone. Okay. Now, turning to the remaining rights that we have left, namely religion and culture. Let's tackle religion first. Now, Section 15 of the Constitution enshrines the right to freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion. This right protects all people, the religious and the irreligious, and ensures that everyone has the freedom to believe or not internally and then to manifest their beliefs externally, even if others think these beliefs are irrational, illogical, or bizarre. Okay, so that is religious freedom. Now, as you can see, this right is fundamentally intertwined with all the other rights in the Bill of Rights, such as, for example, dignity, equality, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and so forth. Now, to reiterate, because religious freedom in Section 15 explicitly protects thought, belief, conscience, and even opinion, belief systems including, but not limited to, atheism and agnosticism, for example, are also included in the ambit of the right to religious freedom, and importantly, they are also constitutionally protected. Now, it also becomes immediately obvious, given that the right includes thought and opinion, that a very close relationship exists between the right to religious freedom and the right to freedom of expression. Now, the right to freedom of expression, I just have to point out, expressly includes the freedom to receive or impart information and ideas in the Constitution. Now, it's also important to note that South Africa is not a secular state like the United States of America, for example. In fact, Section 15 expressly provides for the conducting of religious observances in state and state-aided institutions. So, for example, our public schools. Now, this allows and even welcomes civil servants, learners, teachers, etc., to practice their religion in these public places, subject, of course, to certain rules to ensure fairness. Now, finally, the Constitution goes one step further than just Section 15, and it even entrenches the right of religious communities to practice their religion together and to form and join and maintain religious associations in Section 31 of the Constitution. So, What did the Foundation CRL Rights Report Card find were the positive developments when it came to the right to religious freedom? Well, the version of the Bella Act that was signed into law no longer proposes removing school governing bodies' power to manage school assets. Now, this is important because many religious communities rent or use school halls to have their meetings. And taking away school governing bodies or SGB's power to manage the school's assets would have impacted their ability to exercise their religious rights, both as individuals who, attended the community meeting in that school building, or as a religious community itself, due to, obviously, this would have affected the renewal and or granting of the leases to these communities if you take away the school governing body's powers. Did I say that clearly? Okay, good. Okay. Similarly, the version of the General Intelligence Laws Amendment Bill, or the GILAB Act, which was signed into law, no longer contains the overbroad definitions and failure to protect lawful political activity, advocacy, protest, or dissent. Now, you may recall that the initial version of this law triggered massive concern from across society, but specifically looking at the religious freedom aspect of it, it triggered massive concern from the religious community because many religious communities who oppose government policies may have found the South African Intelligence Agency subjecting them, in other words, them as members or them as leaders, to security vetting investigations for the purposes of either issuing or denying a security clearance certificate. Now, the implied risk was that those religious institutions and communities who were refused a certificate would have been forced to close. Now, it's important to point out here that because of public participation and the public comments made on this initial version of the law, Parliament significantly amended it before passing it, effectively removing all constitutional and all religious freedom concerns. I cannot stress enough how much public participation in our lawmaking process matters. Use your constitutional rights. It is not just about going to the voting booth every few years. We are a participatory democracy, which means we get a voice in the laws made in this country. Use it. Okay, now turning to the negative developments. What were these? Well, first there were several incidents of religious intolerance over the course of last year, between September 2024 and September 25. Now these are all fully covered in the report card, which again you can download by scanning the QR code. If you have difficulty scanning the QR code, find one of the young people. There are many attending today. They can assist. So these incidents of religious intolerance happened from between September 24 and September 25. And what is important to note here is that these instances show how international conflicts, like, for example, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, negatively impacts relationships between religious groups, for example, Jews and Muslims in South Africa. Now, in this regard, the Foundation urges the Civil Rights Commission, who, as part of its mandate in the Constitution, has that it must promote and develop peace, friendship, humanity, tolerance, and national unity among South Africa's religious communities, to engage with both groups, to find ways of resolving tensions, as Chris said, to prevent the use of language that others, and to basically build bridges in the relationship so that the conflict that arises from international conflict doesn't deteriorate us coexisting together in South Africa and celebrating our diversity and living out our religions freely. Now, second, there seems to be renewed interest from the Civil Rights Commission to revive its previous recommendations for peer review mechanisms in religious communities. The Civil Rights Commission established a Section 22 committee in terms of the CRL Act to develop and implement the peer review mechanism and draft recommendations for oversight of the religious sector. This is also fully covered in the report card. However, what is important to note here is that should religious communities, beliefs, and their expression thereof be regulated, this will directly impact on the individual believers who make up that religious community's right to religious freedom, that religious community, insofar as it's a juristic person and it's applicable, the religious community's right to religious freedom, the Section 31 right of religious communities to practice their religion together and to form, join, and maintain religious associations, and their Section 18 right to join, their Section 18 right of religious freedom, of freedom of association. Apologies. Thus, any oversight of the religious sector and of religious leaders, or perhaps their doctrine, must pass the Constitution's test to limit any of these rights, which requires, amongst other things, that there are no other less restrictive means available. Now, lastly, the Expropriation Act is concerning in the context of religious freedom, because land that is either owned by religious organizations or used for religious purposes may still be subject to state expropriation without compensation or no compensation as per the Act. Now, in light of both of the above, the right to religious freedom in the report card was graded as a C-. In other words, moderate, but showing signs of regression. Now, turning to the right to participate in the cultural life of one's choice, which is entrenched in Section 30 of the Constitution. At the start of 2025, national government reaffirmed its commitment to ensuring safer customary initiation, and its COCTA department launched the Safe Customary Initiation Awareness Campaign for the initiation season to eliminate initiate deaths and injuries. Similarly, the CRL Rights Commission stated that it would work with key stakeholders to address the various issues leading to initiate deaths. Now, prior to the winter season, the Limpopo COCTA department, so this is obviously the provincial department of COCTA, and then we just spoke about the national COCTA department. So prior to the winter initiation season, the Limpopo COCTA department put stricter measures such as the vetting of traditional surgeons and principles in place to try and ensure a safer initiation season with no deaths. Now, the Northwest Provincial Government rolled out awareness campaigns on the provisions of the Customary Initiation Act, which is the act that sets out the norms and standards within which the customary practice of initiation must take place. Now, this campaign came in response to a surge of illegal initiation schools, which had resulted in the loss of 6 lives and the rescue of over 100 initiates. Now, last year, the enjoyment of this right, the right to practice the culture of one's choice and participate in the cultural life of one's choice, was graded as good, with signs of improvement, a B+. While in 2025, so far this year, government campaigns to ensure safer initiation practices addresses the need for proactive public education regarding initiation and the law. Accordingly, the right was graded as a B-, reflecting good enjoyment with no change. In conclusion, overall, the CRL Rights Report Card found that between September 2024 and September 2025, 5 CRL rights regressed in their enjoyment, 4 CRL rights improved in their enjoyment, and there was no change in the enjoyment of 2 of the CRL rights. Thank you for your attentive consideration. I now yield the floor to the Foundation's Executive Director, Christo van der Rede, who will provide the concluding remarks for today's launch.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we almost, towards the end of our program. It's now 5 minutes past 12. And perhaps just a few concluding remarks from myself. I remember at one stage I decided to pursue a master's degree at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. I arrived there and decided, okay, let me do one of the electives called cost accounting. I joined the class and the professor prescribed a book from Harvard University, a thick book like this. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm not too stupid, maybe I can manage this. But it was also written in Harvard English. I tell you, it was the most difficult period in my life. I often ran to UWC's library because they had a few Afrikaans books there on kostenberekening, cost accounting. And I used those Afrikaans textbooks to do the translation just to understand what this subject is all about. I tell you, I didn't pass with an A, nor a B, nor a C. I scraped through. But if it wasn't for those Afrikaans textbooks, I wouldn't have passed that elective. And it just shows how important it is, not the language itself, but to understand things, to comprehend. And often we deny that opportunity to young people. Studies show that a kid that is dumped into an English class and is, for example, Afrikaans or is a course of speaking, it takes them almost the entire primary school career just to comprehend, to understand. And I think we do our kids a great disservice. So thank you, Daniela. Ladies and gentlemen, it's clear from the Constitutional Rights Program's team's presentation, one of the principal developments affecting CRL rights between September 2024 and 2025 was the opportunities presented by artificial intelligence technologies. It offers an unprecedented chance to give effect to the linguistic rights enshrined in the Constitution. For example, the launch of Iris, an AI-powered teaching robot capable of delivering lessons in all 11 official languages. And that's what we should do. Look at technologies, use innovative means to just help those kids to understand what the teacher is trying to tell them or to teach them. As a former educator and school principal myself, I find it important to point out the absolute vitality of being taught in one's mother tongue, especially in the foundation phase, the primary school. I remember when I did my BA degree at UWC, I think I was in my final year when I decided now I'm going to write this examination paper in English. And I did so. And the next day I bumped into my lecturer and I asked her, listen, how did I do? She said, you did very, very well. But that didn't make me an English-speaking person. But the fact that I had the opportunity in my first formative years at UWC to be taught in my home language, that enabled me to then write an examination paper, nogal psychology in English. Now that is an achievement for me. So, ladies and gentlemen, yes, it's no use we continue along a path where we continue to do the same things over and over and then expect a different result. So our work here at the foundation is to really lay the facts bare and to ensure that perhaps those who are in power in formulating policies, that there's a change in mindset, a change in approach, so that our people can really benefit from what our Constitution has to offer. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me now to the last part of our conversation, and perhaps your views, your ideas. Let's have an open conversation. Anyone would like to perhaps share a couple of points? Anyone? Yeah, there you go, sir. Sir, please, your name and surname? Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning, afternoon. Good
Afternoon.
afternoon. My name is Fabian Chitran from Civil Society. I'm just curious with the language, with the findings that we stand with as of 2018 to 2016, the report that
Are you talking about this part of basic education where they look at the number of
Yes, correct. No, I just wanted, during that period, I don't know, I'm speaking as a correction professor, the late Professor Neville Alexander, his organization
Yeah,
at UCT,
yeah.
I'm just interested that how come they didn't effect, such, obviously it's a pocket organization, but I mean, why didn't they effect such, strong change and morphing in the alternative language?
Very interesting, Prof. Neville Alexander, we were very close friends and we worked very well together. At that time, I was the head of the Stichting vir Bemagtiging deur Afrikaans, SBA, language organization. Neville was professor at UCT and he led PRISA. They focused
correct.
on indigenous languages.
Yes.
He also served on various commissions. He also worked very closely with government on giving effect to, the work that he did was internationally recognized.
Yes.
And he, at that time when he was still alive, was seen as the expert on indigenous language and promotion thereof. But in the absence of political will, sadly though, none of those things materialized. And Neville, when he passed away, he was a broken man, because given his particular history of struggle and working towards a dispensation where there's parity of esteem for all of our languages, celebrating our cultures and so forth, unfortunately, the state has just taken the easy route. And the political will, in the absence of that, none of those recommendations were ever. It's now that some of those recommendations are being considered, and we've seen it you can see in the report card, where government now suddenly, there's one particular piece of legislation that was already on the table of the president since 2014 that they only signed now. And that relates to language competencies and what is it called? Just help me with that. Yeah. So hopefully over time. And none of us are saying that we must do away with English. No. We speak English here today because it's a language that we all accept as the language of commonality. We understand, and me with my West Coast English, and you with your English, ons kom oor die weg, ons verstaan mekaar. But what we are saying is, why do we neglect the diversity of the languages that exist? If you start doing analysis of the economic value of languages, take Afrikaans for example, there's television, there's radio, there's printed media, etc., etc. But even, Afrikaans language is under pressure. The Afrikaans Taalraad Executive Director highlighted that in a conference 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. What about our other indigenous languages? If you start unlocking the value and the wealth of richness through our other indigenous languages, we can create jobs. We can create a whole value chain of industries, right? And the big question that I raised in the article that I wrote a few days ago is, where's the Silicon Valley of AI technologies that we can work on to bring about opportunities through our different languages? Okay, there's a hand.
Just a quick comment, if I may. Price, one should not underestimate the value of Price's current and ongoing work. I think they have a wide influence, almost like sourdough. They've had a huge impact on several other NGOs that work in the sector.
Perhaps, Conrad, you are also with ILAF. If you can just explain what you are doing there.
Well, we provide, ILAF is the Indigenous Languages Action Forum, aimed at promoting the indigenous languages of the country, and that includes then Afrikaans as well. They started, we provide a secretariat support. We fall under a steering committee. We built up a pretty wide social media network. We're driving issues. We hold language between the generations in Afrikaans and Xhosa exclusively. So we'll see how that goes. They've recently established a new group, an additional group looking at mother tongue-based education, and the growth has been explosive. So they've become quite a center for discussion about these things. Thanks, Krista.
Yeah.
So if I may also just address something
Yeah.
and Fadil's question. Sorry, I'm told I need to speak into the mic. No, you need to move closer.
Got so scared now when you lean so close.
No, I'm too scared of Auntie Merlin to lean too close. Okay, so Fadil, also just to bring another aspect, yes, I think there's the political will. I also think parents need to understand, for example, the importance of mother tongue education for their child's cognitive development, understanding of concepts, and then, yes, later on to transition into a common tongue like English. Now, I would strongly encourage you to download the full report, because in the full report, if you look at the section on education, section 29.2, we've done an actual table looking at the DBE's report on schools and languages from 2016, looking at, in that same report, the amount of children who spoke each language. And we said, okay, so hang on. You say we have, 20 odd something thousand schools that teach English, 23,486 schools that taught in English as the language of learning and teaching in that time period, 2008 to 2016. And again, as my learned colleague Lusanda said, this report was released in May 2023. But, so that's almost 51.27% of all schools in the country taught in English as the language of learning and teaching. But according to the department's own data, that was only the language spoken by 5.98% of learners as their mother tongue. Okay, so now we start seeing the big problem here. We're not saying English as a common tongue is bad. It also allows us to work internationally, right? The way French would and the way Swahili would. It would open up East Africa for us. But we can all see that, okay, whoa, this is a very disproportionate picture that is being painted about the amount of English schools compared to every other official language, compared to the country's language profile. So then what we also did is, it's like, okay, we know that these numbers about the amount of children who speak these languages as, say, their mother tongue is now outdated, because this study, even though it was released 2 years ago, was from 2008 to 2016. So we're like, okay, what we do have is newer numbers from Stats SA because of the 2022 census. So you'll find there's also a table there examining the amount of schools, assuming, and it is based on the assumption that the amount of schools that taught in those languages remained the same, what the actual ideal number would look like, taken on the new mother tongue numbers that we got in the 2022 census. And so assuming that the total amount of schools stayed the same, that we still had 23,486 schools teaching English as the language of learning and teaching, but looking at the fact that that would now be the mother tongue of 8.7% of learners, according to the 2022 census, we still see that actually the ideal number of schools with this as their language of learning and teaching should not be 23,486. It should be 3,985. Okay, so we have a surplus of 19,501 schools that are teaching in English as the language of learning and teaching. And again, that just emphasizes the fact for you that yes, there's a lack of political will, but also, Fadil, I would say a lack of understanding from parents about the benefit of learning in your mother tongue. Because remember, up until the Bella Act came into being, parents, in the form of school governing bodies, and again, parents make up the majority of school governing members on the school governing body, had the exclusive right to set a school's language policy. Okay, so they would have chosen, we want an English school. okay? They would have said, look, English is the language of commerce in South Africa, let's have an English school, okay? It's easier to find teachers who can teach in English, let's have an English school, okay? Now, obviously with the Bella Act, the MEC, or the head of department rather, apologies, of that province can say, okay, look, Fadil, you want a Siswati school, but actually, you know, you have more isiNdebele learners around you in your community that don't have a school to go to. You need to accommodate them as well, become a multilingual school. Now, so that has obviously changed, but I think what remains important is that parents need to understand how important it is for their children to learn in their mother tongue. And they need to, again, take pride in a good way, the way Chris said, in their language and in their mother tongue. And that will also, with the political world, that unlocks value change and starts almost encourage investment in those languages. That will also start shifting parents' mindsets. So in Lusanda and I, in our report card, we submitted that, you know, parents wanting to enroll their children in an English medium school is likely due to it being seen as being the language of commerce, and this will unlock job opportunities. If you're good at English, you know, you'll stand a better chance of getting a job one day, going to university, things like that. But again, this comes at the expense of learning benefits inherent in being taught in your mother tongue. And now, while the number of schools for other official languages, other than English and Afrikaans, have grown, there is still a shortage should South Africa wish to give its learners the benefit of mother tongue education. And we actually said that, you know, undertake education campaigns with parents, launch a campaign. SGBs can still set the language policy. Yes, this can now be overridden by the HOD of the province. But if more parents wanted schools in, say, Siswati, if more parents wanted schools in Afrikaans, if more parents wanted isiXhosa schools, then I think that would go a long way to affecting the political will and making sure that because that is an extreme, unproportionate, disproportionate number. Over 19, almost 20,000 more schools. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
But what we need to also, thank you.
Here we go.
What we also need to bear in mind is that being taught in your mother tongue is not always the magic wand, because there's a whole lot of other factors that impact on teaching. In poor areas where there's poverty, where there's all kinds of other social ills, there you can teach mother tongue. It will not change the fortunes of those kids. So it's a whole lot of factors that must be sort of working together to bring about quality education. So we must also bear that in mind, because there were a couple of studies done in terms of that as well. Ja, baie welkom, Bram.
I want to change the topic a little bit. I've been following the assassination of Charlie Kirk quite closely lately. And it opened a can of worms. A lot of questions that I don't want to go into now. But I just want to read from your own report: freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion on the one hand, but you also said, someone said about the freedom to say what you want to say, but not harming other people in the process. And so where does it leave us when you then look at the scorecard and we see here moderate but showing signs of regression? So it's good to have a scorecard in front of you. It's a nice C minus, but if you put that into a broader context and you look at reality and how it pans out in other contexts and what the implications are of regression, then it really, I think we need to look at it more closely and ask ourselves, where do we really stand and what are the implications of regression in the South African context? Just look at social media and what's going on at the moment.
then I think this for me, even more so, because we're talking about the harm of little children, but with even broader the social cohesion, the context, the possibility of conflict, then this is for me a scary one.
Absolutely. Yeah. Christian?
May I come in on that as well? I thought that was one of the most interesting aspects about the report was talking about spillover effects from developments overseas. And I think we can look at what the situation is here locally, but increasingly we're going to think about the international context and how that affects those dynamics here. We're not an island. We're less and less an island because of social media. And you were talking about AI. Language is a deeply political act. I remember numerous conversations now with translators where they said, look, I want to translate this court case, but I'm making up language as I go because we don't have this type of language in Setswana.
Yeah.
And if we hand that power over to an AI, bot of some sort, or the power of interpretation of language to externally built AIs, I think this is really something we need to consider very deeply. And it might be worth raising in Parliament to say this is a discussion that should be had in body politic, what the development of language in the technological context means. So spillover, thank you very much for bringing that in, and also perhaps to look at in the coming years. And then finally this idea of technology not being neutral. Yeah.
Very interesting. Neville Alexander used to talk about the power of language versus the language of power. And that, sort of contradiction, it will forever stay with me, because how do you, at the end of the day, not find yourself in a situation where the power of language is abused for other purposes, as opposed to, what language can mean for people in their everyday lives. Okay, there's a hand, and then Prof. Audrey?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm sorry for being late. I'm from independent media, so I didn't want to miss this deadline, but I had to miss another one, so apologies for that. So in our stable, we've got, in our stable, we've got obviously the English newspapers, and we've got the Daily Voice, which is off the cards. I sign up all the pages every night, so I never know when there's a spelling error, because I thought it should be like that. Hulle praat hulle eie taal, Afrikaans. So, I think I brought up. Yes, okay, thank you. But also in our stable, we've got isiLezwe, isiXhosa, and isiZulu. So, the success of those two newspapers, I can't tell you how absolutely successful they are and how popular they are. It's really, it's what you said earlier on. You speak the language. Yeah, exactly. And something else, I think it's Danielle, right, that you said earlier on, that I also just wanted to say quickly, is that the importance of opinions. And that is one thing that our group aggressively supports, diverse voices in all our papers, and that's so important. Chris has got my details, and he knows. In the beginning, when I said, if they were the platters, I said, what? I said, it's Christo, that's what they stand for. Oh, okay, you know the fight. So it's really, I'm extremely proud of those titles that we still maintain, and the fact that we're still printing. Thank you.
Prof?
Yeah, thank you, Christo. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about these topics. I want to pick up on your point. You know what the incident of Charlie Kirk sort of emphasizes is how polarized the society in the US became. And I think I'm so pleased that you're promoting these type of conversations, because I think a huge challenge for us as South Africans is really to work very hard to become more united.
Yes.
I feel our political parties have a tendency to continue to polarize us. And as civil society, I think we need to do much more, because what's happening in the States is already happening here too. It's a fascist takeover, and it's going to affect all of us. And the downside of a fascist takeover is that you always create an other, an evil other, like they're doing with immigrants now, who are criminals, who are rapists. And that creates, and also comfort using violence to create chaos so that when there's chaos, the military can come in and the president can have total power. So what's happening in the States, it's a real warning for us to really work very hard on becoming more united and to work particularly with our political parties to realize you can have disagreements, but you also need to have the goal of creating a more united South Africa. You know, there's just one other thing I want to raise. When we talk about culture in South Africa, we often don't talk about the worldview differences. And we live in a society where you have the European worldview, you have the African worldview, you have the Asian worldview. It's a huge plus for us, but we don't talk about that. And therefore, I think on the whole, we conflate culture with worldview. For example, Anta Diop said, there's a southern worldview and a northern worldview. Now, I think it's much broader than that, but I emphasized those two. The northern worldview was an adjustment to a very severe climate, and therefore individualism was emphasized. It's also a patriarchal worldview. The African worldview is a matriarchal worldview. It's an emphasis on collective. It's also a worldview that developed in a very benign environment. So therefore you could live without, the Khoi didn't really have a military culture because they lived in harmony with each other. And if there was disharmony, you could move away. But I think it's so important that we start talking about worldview differences. Because worldview is the way we interpret reality, the way we make judgments. I often make the joke about privacy and a lack of privacy. In the States, privacy is very highly valued. It's part of their culture. You won't just knock on someone's door, let alone walk into a house. In the African worldview, there's not much of a sense of privacy. You know, we walk into each other's house. I have friends who come into the bedroom, pull up the blanket, slap, we don't. The other, a guy, Edwin Nichols, speaks a lot about the different type of worldviews. For example, African worldview is very comfortable with feelings. And therefore we speak loudly and we express our feelings. Whereas in the Western worldview, there's sort of a sense of personal distance and not to encroach on other people's personal space by speaking too loud. So, I can't emphasize it enough that I think we need to work much more to understand these worldview differences, because I think we'll appreciate each other so much more if we start realizing that we come from these different worldviews. And what a plus it is for us to be a society that's so comfortable in worldviews. Just on that too, although, I come from an indigenous background, my culture was an adjustment to a westernized society. So my culture, my secondary culture is Western. And it also touched on the language thing. Therefore, I needed to be fluent in English and in Afrikaans. So it's easy then to conflate those two things. But I often say I grew up in an indigenous home, like where my mother and father have San, Khoi, Nguni-speaking backgrounds. And we have a touch of German Jewish too, but that guy didn't stick around, so he didn't have much influence on our socialization. But genetically, there is that connection. But so we, as people in the Khoi and the San community and in the Nguni community, are very menslievend. We are humane people. Whereas the folks in the Western worldview had to develop a militaristic and an aggressive culture because they had to protect our resources. And therefore, we can utilize the fact that we are such menslevende people much more in how we engage with each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, very interesting. I purchased a property in an area where we live in silence. Now it's different flats on top of each other, but you don't hear a mouse squeak there. Everyone is silent, quiet, and we all just greet each other. But then there's a certain group of people, that have this Khoisan blood in them. When we get together, as kinders ons almal lekker van die bure, It's very interesting how these things. And then we want to hear, what is that one doing? What is that one doing? But that, menslievendheid, that togetherness, it's almost non-existent where people work in a gentrificated space almost. Any other things? Yes, please go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, to what extent was the draft regulations for BELA considered during the compiling of the report, and do they address any of the concerns that the foundations have, how it affects language rights, and especially in education?
So the report does mention the regulations, but it doesn't do a deep dive into them because the period that the report covers is September 2024 to September 2025, and Malherbe, the BELA regulations only close for comment now, I think of October. There's been an extension. So next year's report card will do a deep dive into them. Okay.
Thank you. There was a gentleman over there and then somebody there at the back. Please go ahead.
Hi, you spoke about how San Khoi Dumalang only have 6,000 individuals supposedly that speak languages. So I just wanted to ask, what exactly are governments or organizations doing to further educate people in these languages so that way the language doesn't go extinct? And also the natives as well, they do have their own native language that they can confer in. So even like Zulu people, KZN Yuko, you can speak Zulu to anyone understand. So exactly, what exactly are organizations doing that these languages also they can grow, so people can also go out of their homes and speak these to other people and they can understand each other?
Okay. Non-governmental or governmental?
I'd like to say both, regardless.
Okay. Thank you for that question. I think it's very important. And Lusanda did cover a section briefly in the speeches, because as you can see, the report itself is actually quite thick. But the one you download is very pretty, so I would encourage you to download it anyway. It's very pretty. Abby outdid herself with the design. But we actually look, because remember the state, in terms of the Constitution, actually has an obligation to the languages, the official languages recognized, which, as Lusanda said, will soon include sign language, because that amendment of the Constitution has been signed into law, I think it was 2 years ago already, and it still hasn't come into operation. But the state has a duty to protect and promote these languages and also to ensure parity of esteem. And yes, so we actually looked at the local governments, so your municipalities and your provincial government and your national government, because they're supposed to be using these official languages so that people who come to them can actually speak to them and they can find each other and understand one another without the burden being shifted onto the citizen coming to them for help. Okay? The report card, for example, talks about the fact that the Northern Cape Police Commissioner issued an order that all complaints need to be in English. Now, imagine that for the Northern Cape. The Northern Cape does not predominantly speak English, okay? Now, that actually goes against a court order from the Northern Cape High Court years before that said, no, that's unconstitutional. People need to be able to approach you in the language that they speak. So we can see that the Pan-South African Language Board engaged them in this and all of that. But it shows you the importance of, one, the political will that Christo mentioned from the state side. Because, I mean, Lusanda mentioned in her speech, what was it? Half of municipalities please don't worry. Half of municipalities don't actually... Yes. And she also mentioned that Ekurhuleni, for example, which, I mean, that's one of the major metros in the country, and it was issuing tenders in only English. So, Chris, I take your point about AI and political things, but I think, yes, let's look at some of the plain government documents that do not have political language in them, like tenders, and let's get them out, and bylaws and things. Let's get them out in languages that people can understand. So yes, I think there is a certain mind shift that needs to happen in government, and the understanding of, look, technology suddenly means that this has become much more possible than it has ever before, at a very cost-effective way. Because before you would have actually had to have a human do it, and now we can actually use AI to do it. And make those facilities available so that the page, you know, when you click to apply for a tender or something, or complete a tender application, actually downloads in isiXhosa or whatever it is you wish to speak. And then secondly, I think I can't speak on behalf of all civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations, but there are quite a few present, Conrad from ELAF, and so forth. I would suggest that you engage with them. But from the FW de Klerk Foundation side, one of the big initiatives we do is this report card every year to raise awareness on it. And then also, given our capacity at the moment, we do try and translate absolutely everything that we write into both English and Afrikaans. I would love to see that expand into all official languages at one point. So hopefully not in the too distant future, but at this point it's still in the future for us. So I think it's for people to realize the value chains that, like Audrey said, that language unlocks, that it's not, I think people are hesitant because it's easier to just speak English and approach one another in English and approach a government official in English. Yeah. But I think once you have that mindset click of like, wow, this actually unlocks economic value chains, then hopefully we'll see something shift.
But I think, you know, one of the easy things that can be done is to, on a regional basis, for example, Western Cape, you want your boards in the airport, wherever, to be in English, Afrikaans, and isiXhosa, for example. In the Northern Cape, you can have English, Afrikaans, and Nama, for example. In the Free State, you add Sotho, KZN Zulu. Because, you know, there's also a tourism value to it, yes, because people like to enjoy these differences. But I think the big opportunity, obviously, is to really focus on developing languages and create a woordeskat, what is the English
vocabulary.
Word? Vocabulary, especially a technical vocabulary. And we in Afrikaans are far more advanced than the Dutch. The Dutch use English words. We use Afrikaans words. There they talk about a computer. Hier by ons praat ons van 'n rekenaar. Yes, go ahead, gentlemen. Yeah.
All of this is supposed to be regulated by the Use of Official Languages Act. Yes. And every government department and institution and province and city are supposed to have language policies which determine which languages will be used by that governmental body. And each governmental body must have at least 2 languages. Now, has there been any improvement in the implementation of the Official Use of Languages Act? Because when I last saw, it was a dead letter. Very few government departments had policies and very few kept them up to date, and even fewer implemented them.
Thank you, Dave, for that very important question, because again, that goes to your question of what the state is doing. So we actually have this wonderful law in place, but like Lusanda said, you can have the most amazing, up-to-date, beautiful language policy, but having it doesn't mean it's being implemented. Okay, so now we have this wonderful law, but what is happening with it? So, Dave, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but due to capacity constraints, PANSOLB did not conduct any monitoring of the National Department's compliance with the Use of Official Languages Act. And that
It's their responsibility.
it is, and that again goes to the point that Lusanda made of the fact that actually PANSOLB, it shouldn't just be, this organization on the periphery, that we actually need to capacitate it to do its job properly. PANSOLB, however, Dave did state that it continues to struggle with enforcing the compliance with the law across all levels of government. And actually, to help it enforce compliance from government departments and public entities, PANSOLB has asked for its legislation, so its empowering act that gives it powers, because the Constitution creates PANSOLB, and then there's a subsidiary legislation that sets out exactly how PANSOLB will work. It's asked for that subsidiary legislation to be amended to give it enforcement powers. Because, let's say, for example, you are the Minister of Housing, and your department has not complied with the Use of Official Languages Act, to have 2 official languages, provide, to use it throughout all your communications, all of that, and you haven't even submitted your report to me, and I'm PANSOLB. Currently, there's not much I can do about it. But if the PANSOLB law gets amended, then I can enforce it and force you to basically do it. And then just quickly, maybe just to paint the context a bit, is, okay, so we don't have a current report from PANSOLB, but we can look at their previous report because this does give us some insights. And it presents PANSOLB's findings on the compliance of 22 national departments and 18 public entities with the Use of Official Languages Act. And from this February 2024 report, we see the following. There was a gap between policy formulation and its practical execution. So again, that point that we've made many times, you can have a wonderful piece of paper, but if no one actually does what the piece of paper says, then it doesn't help anyone. Compliance was low. In fact, the February 2024 report found that national departments and public entities had an average compliance rating of only 35.87%. I don't know, does anyone know if that's like a pass rate in terms of basic education currently? So we don't even know if the government department's passed. And 42% of public entities. And then accessibility of services in a language members of the public understood, because again, I feel like we all need to just draw back to why do we have this? It's so that citizens can talk to the state and understand what the state is saying to them and actually be helped, okay? So accessibility of services in a language members of the public understood was substantially low with an average of 40.24%. Now that should break our hearts, okay? So yeah. That's what I can tell you from the February 2024 report, but that was PANSOLB's latest report. And I mean, PANSOLB unfortunately has had massive budget cuts. I think our report says something along to the lines of 119,000 was cut from it. Yeah, 119 million. Okay, that's an important zero. 119 million. 2 zeros, many zeros. That's an important, yeah. So in 2025, its annual allocation was reduced to 119 million, with only partial relief from a 35 million rollover from National Treasury. So, yeah.
Thanks. Last,
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So my name is Marbongo Msimango. I'm working for the South African Institute for International Affairs, working under the Futures Program. So part of the work that we deal with strategic foresight, anticipated governance, and systems thinking. So with regards to that, I just wanted to ask, what's the view of the FW de Klerk Foundation with regards to the future of South Africa? Because of part of the work that we do is that we sort of like create scenarios in terms of, in 10 years' times, where do you see, let's say, South Africa, what conditions do you see in South Africa 10 years from now, 15 years from now? So I just wanted to know, with regards to language, culture, and religion, do you think that is there a possibility for us to craft sort of like a national language or culture that's going to bring us together, because of South Africa is a very diverse country with so many cultures, religions, languages. So is it possible for us, in the interest of nation building, is it possible for us to craft sort of like a language that's going to ensure that we still keep national building? Because of going back to what the minister said there, in the sense that within our politics, identity politics is sort of like emerging, in the sense that you find that parties like the MK Party, the Patriotic Alliance, even the Freedom Fund Plus, these parties are sort of like pulling us into different directions. So in the interest of nation building, is it possible for us to craft a language that's going to ensure that it brings everyone together? Because I don't think it's enough for us to be South Africans when the Springboks are doing well, when the Bafana Bafana is doing well, or when we are doing well at the Olympics. We should do more in order to ensure that we bring ourselves together for us to move forward as a country. So where do you see us 10 years from now? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you so much.
So I am the positivist. I believe that South Africa has a bright future. But that future, that brightness of the future, doesn't depend on politicians. It depends on us, right? And yes, we have accepted English as the common language, and we use that language in our daily interaction and so forth. But it's our job to position our indigenous languages so that nobody feels marginalized or feel left out. I think that's our responsibility. And yes, I've now marginalized the language of the Sun to the Northern Cape. In fact, I would propose that every province should have should add the Sun language to, the provincial languages, because it wasn't a language that was just restricted to the Northern Cape. It was, you find the language from the Cape right up to the Drakensberg. It's actually a language that has been in existence for 150,000 years. 150,000 years. And within that language, I think we all carry the genetics, whether it's 1%, 5%, or 10% of the earliest people that lived here in South Africa. And I think once we start to recognize that, and once we start to embrace that, that will perhaps foster that national unity spirit and counter this ethnic nationalism that we've seen rising from different quarters. Perhaps that might be something that we must start to consider. But just to end off with a nice joke, this is how people can misunderstand you. So the place where I come from, the only language that people speak there is Afrikaans. And then an Englishman arrived and he wanted to buy a horse from one of the farmers in the area. He knocked on the farmer's door, and the farmer opened and he said, "Meneer, I want to buy a horse." He's speaking English and the farmer only speaks Afrikaans. And then the farmer brought out the first horse, put it on display, and the English gentleman said, "No, man, this horse is too thin." Brought the second horse, "No, man, this one is too this and that," finding faults with the horses. And then he brought the third horse. And he says, "But why do you keep this horse in the stable? This is such a beautiful horse." And all that the farmer could get out was to say, "This horse don't look so good." He says, "How can you say that? This is a beautiful horse. It's looking good." And he took the horse, paid the farmer, and he left. A few days later, he brought the horse back. He told the farmer, and he was very angry. He said, "Why didn't you tell me this horse is blind?" Farmer said, "I told you this horse don't look so good." Okay. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, let's have some nice drinks. Please engage with each other. There's some food there. Please enjoy that. And yes, you are all on our database. We will continue to have these over the weekend conversations. We have even plans to have this Chatham House rules gatherings where people can engage and talk and have our own internal discussions, try to give direction to conversations in South Africa. So thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you very much, also Lusando. Also, where's our other intern? Yes. Okay. There you come to the fore, right? And then also Abby, marketing, please step forward. Where is Brenda? Right. Okay. So I'm surrounded by beautiful ladies. No wonder I feel so inspired. Let me not go beyond that, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much. Anything else? Right. Thank you.